The ship came in wrong. Rail Das noticed it before the dock sensors did. He was on the upper walkway of Bay 9, elbow-deep in a coolant line, when he saw the freighter drift through Gate 7 without slowing. No thrusters firing, no docking signal, just a dead hulk coasting on momentum alone, scraping the guide rail with a sound like something being torn open. He set his wrench down and watched it stop. The ship was old, Vren-built by the look of the hull plating that flat, ugly gray used on cargo runners in the outer lanes. No name, no registration lights. One rear engine pod sheared off completely, the other fused shut from heat damage. Whatever had happened to this ship, it had happened fast. Rail climbed down from the walkway. Duvek was already there when he reached the dock floor. The Brakari security chief stood at his full height, nearly 2.5 meters of plated exoskeleton and 4 blunt arms, and he looked unhappy in the way that only station security chiefs can look unhappy, which is a specific kind of unhappy that involves paperwork. Das, Duvek said, I need a structural assessment before I let anyone inside. Tell me if the hull is going to collapse. It's not going to collapse, Rail said, looking at it. The forward section is intact. Whatever happened hit the rear. Good, then go look inside and tell me what we have. Rail did not ask what he meant by that. The station had standing procedures for unregistered ships. You checked the cargo, you logged it, and you called the right people depending on what you found. Simple work. He had done it a dozen times. He pulled on his breath filter, took a hand torch, and went in through the side hatch, which had already been bent open by the impact against the guide rail. The inside of the ship smelled wrong. He noticed that first. Not the usual smell of a dead ship, cold metal and leaked fuel. This was something else, something animal, warm and dark and thick, like blood that had been sitting for a long time. He moved through the crew corridor. Empty, galley empty. The door to the cargo hold was sealed with a manual lock which someone had engaged from the inside. Rail took a pry bar from his belt, worked the seal and pushed the door open. His torch swept across the hold. Half the hold was collapsed. A bulkhead had come down, and under it, around it, something large was pressed against the far wall. At first he thought it was part of the hull. The shape was too big, too angular, too much of it to process all at once. Dull gray-green like tarnished metal, but moving, breathing. He took a step closer. It was alive. The creature was enormous. 6 limbs, 4 of which were folded tight against its body, and 2 more stretched out at wrong angles, broken, from the look of them. Long neck, flat, broad head, scales that should have been bright but were cracked and dull, the color of something very old and very tired. Around its neck and torso, thick coils of black metal were bolted directly into the scales, wired with suppression nodes that Rail recognized immediately. Vren restraint tech, illegal in every port he had ever worked, the kind used to control living cargo. The creature's eye opened. One eye because the other side of its face was pressed against the wall. The open eye was amber, and it was large, and it looked at him without moving. No aggression, no attempt to get up, just a steady, exhausted look that Rail could not put a word to right away. He stood there for a moment. Then he went back to the hatch. Duvek, he called out, you need to come see this. Duvek came in, looked, and went very still in the way large armored creatures go still when they are processing something unexpected. Behind him, 2 of his officers backed into the corridor without being told to. Droth, Duvek said quietly. His mandibles clicked twice. That is a droth. Rail did not know what a droth was. He knew what the suppression coils were, and he knew what it meant when something that large was too weak to lift its own head. Containment protocol, Duvek said. I am calling the team. We cannot leave it. Those are Vren coils, Rail said. I know what they are. Then you know what they do. Rail was already moving back toward the creature. I am cutting them off. Das, that is a direct. It is dying. He crouched beside the creature's neck, examined the nearest coil mount and found the release point. His hands moved without hurry, the way they always moved when he was working. You do not leave something chained when it is already dying. That is not a protocol question. Duvek did not answer. Rail cut the first coil. The creature flinched hard, a full-body shudder that shook the floor under Rail's boots. He waited. It settled. He cut the second. By the time he reached the fourth, the creature had stopped flinching. It was watching him again with that one amber eye, steady and unreadable. When the last coil came free, it exhaled. A long, slow breath, like something that had been held for a very long time. Rail stood up, looked at Duvek and said, "I am taking her to Bay 9. You cannot possibly know it is a her." "I am taking her to Bay 9, Rail said again. He walked to the hatch. After a moment, he heard something large and broken begin, very slowly to follow. The first thing Rail did was make a list. He sat on an overturned crate in the middle of Bay 9, notepad on his knee, and wrote down everything he had observed about Sora's condition. He had started calling her Sora in his head sometime between the cargo hold and the bay, for no reason he could explain. She needed a name. Things he was responsible for had names. Broken front left limb, broken rear right limb, deep scoring under the scale line across the ribs that was where the restraint rig had been bolted in, not just fastened but bolted, through the scales and into the tissue beneath. Malnutrition, obvious from the dullness of the scales and the way her ribs showed. Eyes clear, which was good. Breathing labored but regular, which was better than it had been on the ship. He read the list back, then he went to work. He did not have medical training. He had 30 years of working on ships, which meant he understood broken things and how to approach them without making them worse. The principles were the same. Assess the damage, stabilize what is critical, do not rush, do not force anything that does not want to move. Every time he reached toward her, she flinched. Not a small flinch. A full-body recoil, all 6 limbs pulling in, neck dropping low, the deep amber of her eyes going flat and dark. The first time it happened, Rail pulled his hand back and waited. 3 minutes. She slowly unwound. He reached again, slower, and stopped his hand 10 centimeters from her foreleg. "I am going to touch your left foreleg now," he said. She looked at him. He waited. Her breathing steadied. He moved his hand the last 10 centimeters and made contact, light as he could manage. She trembled but did not recoil. He kept his hand still, not pressing, not gripping, just present. He did that with every action after. Said it first, waited, then did it. It added an hour to every session. He did not consider skipping it. Wynne arrived at mid-shift, took one look at the situation, and stood in the bay doorway for a long moment with her mouth open. "That is a very large creature," she said. "Yes," Rail said. "In our bay." "Yes." "Rail, that thing is the size of a shuttle." Rail said, "and smaller than the Type 4 hauler we had in here last month. There is room." Wynne came in carefully, gave Sora a wide berth, and crouched beside Rail. She was quiet for a while, watching him work. Then she picked up a roll of wound seal from his kit and held it out when he reached for it. "What happened to her?" Wynne asked. "Vren cartel," Rail said. "Suppression rig. They bolt them in directly so the animal cannot pull free." Wynne looked at the scoring under Sora's ribline. Her expression went flat in a specific way Rail had seen before, which was the expression of a person deciding not to say what they were thinking, because none of the words were appropriate. "Duvek's notice came through," she said instead. 72 hours. After that they transfer her to a containment facility. Rail applied the wound seal to the first section of scoring. "Hand me the secondary strip." "Did you hear what I said?" "I heard you." He held out his hand. She put the strip in it. 72 hours is enough time to stabilize the limbs and get fluids in her. After that, we reassess. "Reassess," Wynne repeated. "Rail, a containment facility means a cage. A cage means—" "I know what it means." Win went quiet. They worked together in silence for a while, Rail moving methodically through the list. Win anticipating his needs with the ease of someone who had assisted him for 4 years. Sarah watched them, both of them, but Roll more than Win. Her eyes tracked him around the bay every time he moved to get a new supply. The color in them had shifted, not the flat dark of fear, but something slower, more uncertain. He noticed it. He did not comment on it. By the 3rd hour, the limb splints were in place. The worst of the scoring was sealed, and Sarah had accepted a trough of water and protein slurry that Rull had mixed from emergency ration stock. She ate the entire trough and looked at him afterward. "I will get more," he told her. He got more. She ate that too. Win went home at the end of her shift. Rull stayed. He sat on the bay floor with his back against the hull of a half-repaired courier ship and went through his notes by hand torch, updating the list. At some point Sarah moved. He heard her before he saw her, the slow scrape of her splinted limbs on the floor, careful and deliberate. He looked up. She was crossing the bay toward him, taking her time, each step placed with the concentration of something working through pain. She stopped in front of him, looked at him for a moment. Then she lowered her head and set it against his shoulder. The weight of it should have knocked him sideways. Somehow it did not. He sat very still and did not move. She exhaled slowly, her whole body settling, and went asleep. Rull looked at the ceiling of Bay 9 for a while. Then he went back to his notes. On the 4th day, Sarah handed Rull a wrench. He had not asked for it. He had been reaching toward his tool tray, which was on the other side of her, and before his hand got there, she had picked it up with 2 careful claws and held it out to him. The right wrench, the exact size he needed. Rull took it, looked at her, said nothing, and went back to work. That evening he started paying closer attention. She watched everything, not the restless watching of an animal in an unfamiliar space, but focused, deliberate observation, the kind a person does when they are learning. She followed his hands. She tracked which tools he picked up before which tasks. When he worked on the courier ship's fuel relay, she watched for an hour without moving, and when he set down the relay casing to check a measurement, she leaned forward and looked at the casing from 2 different angles, as if comparing what she saw to what she expected. He did not know what to do with that, so he kept working. Win brought in Prava on the 6th day. Prava was Aretha, small, pale-feathered, with the careful quiet of someone who spent most of their time listening. She worked in the station's transit office doing Zunalunguista clearance for non-standard arrivals, which meant she spent a lot of time identifying species that did not want to be identified. She stood at the edge of the bay and looked at Sarah for a long time without speaking. "Druth," she said finally, her voice was very soft. "I have only seen images, old ones." She paused. "Most people believe they are gone." "This one is not gone," Rull said. "No," Prava moved a step closer. She was watching Sarah's scales. "She is speaking." Rull looked up. "She has not made a sound." "Not with sound." Prava pointed at the scale line along Sarah's neck. "The color, Druth's scale tone, is communicative. Red is pain or fear. Gold is calm. There are many gradations. Right now she tilted her head. Amber with a slight gold edge. That is curiosity, I believe, mixed with something careful." Rull looked at Sarah's neck. He had noticed the color shifts. He had not known they were words. "Can she understand us?" he asked. "Almost certainly. Druth's cognitive range is very high. Whether she chooses to show that is another matter." Prava glanced at Rull. "The Vrun cartel has been collecting Druth survivors for approximately 12 years. There are perhaps 9 left in known space. They are used as living weapons and engine amplifiers because of the way their biology interacts with certain drive systems." Her voice did not change as she said it. The evenness was worse than anger would have been. "She will have been treated in ways designed to prevent trust." "I know," Rull said. "You understand what I am telling you may not be fixable. I am not trying to fix her. I am trying to make sure she is not in pain." Prava looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to Sara and made a slow, small gesture with one wing finger spread, a kind of open palm acknowledgement. Sara watched it. Her scales shifted. Prava made a quiet sound. She knows that gesture, Prava said. It is very old, pre-contact druth greeting. I did not expect. She stopped. She recognized it. That evening Prava began visiting Bay 9 daily. She and Raul compared observations. The scale color vocabulary was extensive. Prava could identify about 30 distinct states from historical texts, but Sara seemed to use a wider range than any of the references described. Raul began keeping a second notepad just for color observations. He also began developing his own shorthand with Sara, independent of what Prava was cataloging. It grew from his mechanic habits, the small hand signals he used when working in loud engine bays where shouting did not carry. Open hand meant stop. Two fingers pointed meant look here. A slow tap on a surface meant is this the right one. Sara learned them all within 2 days. Then she started adding her own. A slow blink meant yes. Looking away and back meant no. Touching her own foreleg where his splint was meant it does not hurt right now. He wrote all of those down too. On the 8th day, a message arrived from a legal address in the Outer Rim. It was addressed to Tuva Station Security Chief Duvuk and capcut to Raul's work terminal. The language was formal and entirely clear. The vessel recovered at Gate 7 had been the property of the Vrun cartel. The cargo aboard that vessel was therefore also cartel property. A recovery writ was being filed with the Outer Rim Accord Authority and would take legal effect within 16 days. Raul read the message twice. Sara was watching him from across the bay. Her scales had gone the flat, dark red that Prava had identified as fear on the first day. She was looking at his face, reading something in his expression that he had not put there intentionally. He set the message down. He looked at her. "Not happening," he said. He was not sure she understood the words, but her scales shifted dark red, pulling back, slowly, a thread of uncertain amber coming through. It was enough for now. He went back to work. The station adapted in the way stations always adapt to unusual things, which is slowly, grudgingly, and then all at once. For the first week, the corridor outside Bay 9 was avoided. Crew members took the long route around. Duvuk posted a single officer at the entrance with instructions to keep foot traffic moving and not to make eye contact with whatever was inside. Raul ignored all of this and kept working. By the second week, people were stopping. Not entering, just stopping at the open bay door for a few seconds, looking in, then moving on. Raul noticed but said nothing. Sara noticed too. The first few times she went dark red immediately and pressed against the back wall. After several days of people looking and leaving without anything bad happening, she stopped going red. She started watching back, which apparently unsettled the watchers more than the fear response had. An old Brikari dockhand named Ussa changed things. He arrived one morning with a flat container of raw cargo fish from the cold storage in Bay 3. He stood at the door holding it out, not coming in, not speaking. Raul looked at him. Ussa shrugged with one of his 4 arms and said, "She looks thin." Raul gestured for him to set it inside the doorway. Ussa did. Sara crossed the bay cautiously, sniffed the container and looked at Raul. Raul gave her the 2-finger point. She ate the fish in 4 bites. Ussa left looking like a man who had accomplished something important. He came back the next morning with more fish. By the end of that week he was coming in, setting the container down himself, and talking to Sara in a low Brikari dialect while she ate. She never went red around him. Raul thought that said something good about Ussa. Other people followed. Quietly, individually. A Aretha transit clerk brought dried protein rations. A human fuel tech brought a bedding mat rated for heavy loads, which was the closest thing available to comfortable flooring for something Sara's size. Nobody announced they were doing it. They just showed up and left things and went back to work. Raul watched all of this from his workbench and kept his feelings about it in a place where they would not interfere with his hands. Sarah was helping him now. Not occasionally, regularly. She had figured out the organization of his tool trays in the first week, and now she anticipated most of what he needed before he asked. She could hold components in place with a precision that no clamp on the station could match. When he needed a second set of eyes on a tight interior space, she could extend her neck at angles that would have required a camera rig. On the 13th day, he was fighting a fuel relay seal that had been cross-threaded by whoever had worked on it before him. It was a 2-hour job in a bad position, and he had been at it for 90 minutes when Sora leaned past him, examined the seal for a moment, and then turned it with 3 claws in a single smooth motion. It released cleanly. Rael stared at it. Sara looked at him. Her scales were gold. "I have been fighting that for an hour and a half," he said. She held his gaze. "Right," he said, and went back to work. Wynn pushed him about the legal situation daily. The cartel's recovery writ had a hard deadline, and the advocate Preva had found a cautious Orathi named Betty's who specialized in non-standard sentience cases, said they had a narrow argument but it needed to be filed before the writ finalized. The core of it was simple. Sora was a person. Persons could not be property. But the Droth had never been formally classified as a protected species because nobody had ever tried. Rael filed the challenge on day 14. He filled out the form at his workbench with grease still on his hands. In the field marked relationship to subject he wrote, Mechanic, Bay 9, Tarva Station. In the field for subject's current residence he wrote, Bay 9, Tarva Station. Under species he wrote, Droth. Under status he wrote, Person. Wynn read it over his shoulder. Under your occupation you wrote mechanic and then crossed it out and wrote it again. I was thinking. About what? Rael sealed the document. About the fact that this should not be complicated. She is clearly not an object. The form is just the form. Wynn was quiet for a moment. Some people are going to argue it is. Some people argue everything. He sent the filing. That is their problem. Sora had been watching from across the bay. When Rael looked up, her scales were that slow, shifting gold that Preva had identified early on as calm. But there was something else layered under it, something Preva's reference texts did not have a name for. Rael had started thinking of it as the color she went when she was watching him specifically, as opposed to watching the bay in general. He had not written that one down yet. He was not sure what word to put next to it. He put his notepad away and started on the next job. Garros arrived on a registered cartel courier, which meant he had nothing to hide and wanted everyone to know it. He was tall for a Vren, lean and scaled in pale gray, with the unhurried walk of someone who had never once been late to anything because everything simply waited for him. He had 2 enforcers with him. 2 more were visible at the dock entrance. He carried no weapon that Rael could see, which probably meant he did not think he would need one. He found Bay 9 without asking anyone for directions. Rael was at his workbench when Garros appeared in the doorway. Wynn was beside him, running a wiring check on a dismantled nav unit. Sara was in the back of the bay, and she went red the moment she saw him, not the gradual shift Rael had learned to read as caution, but an immediate, total red, the kind that meant recognition. Garros looked at Sara, then he looked at Rael. "You are the mechanic," he said. "Yes," Rael said. "You filed the sentience challenge." "Yes." Garros moved into the bay 2 steps, hands open and relaxed. He had the manner of a man being patient with something that did not deserve his patience. "I will not waste time. The writ is valid. The accord challenge your advocate filed is creative, but it will not survive review. The hearing is a formality." He paused. "I am not here to threaten you. I am here to give you 24 hours to make this simple." Rael set down the part he was holding. "You are here to collect something that is not yours. It has been cartel property for 9 years. Rael said, and 9 years of holding someone does not make them yours. Garros looked at him the way people look at a door that is stuck, a moment of mild assessment before deciding how much force to apply. You are a mechanic on a mid-tier dock station. You have a repair license and a bay rental. You have no legal standing, no political leverage, and no resources to extend this fight past the hearing. He said it without cruelty, just facts laid out. Walk away. There will be no consequence for you. The bay was very quiet. Rael looked at Sora. She was pressed against the far wall, entirely red, and she was shaking not in the way of something about to attack, but in the way of something that remembered being afraid and could not stop the memory from running. He looked back at Garros. No, Rael said. Garros nodded slowly, as if this was the expected answer and he was already past it. He left without another word. The enforcers went with him. Wynne waited until the sound of footsteps faded. Then she put down the nav unit and said, very quietly, "We have 24 hours. I know. Rael, he is not wrong about the resources. I know. Rael walked to the back of the bay. Sora was still shaking. He stopped in front of her and waited the way he always waited until she looked at him. I am not going to tell you it is fine, he said. It is not fine right now, but I am working on it. She looked at him for a long moment. Slowly, the red at the edges of her scales began to soften. Wynne was already at her communicator. She had the sharp, focused look she got when she was angry enough to do something useful with it. Within the hour, she had sent Sora's story, the suppression coil evidence, Preva's species documentation, photographs of the bolt scars under Sora's ribline, to 7 different alien rights organizations, and every press relay that covered the outer trade lanes. By midnight it was moving. Rael did not sleep. He sat in Bay 9 with Sora and read the incoming messages as they came, advocates offering help, journalists requesting statements, 3 different Accord representatives asking for confirmation of the species identification. He answered the ones he could and forwarded the rest to Betty's. At some point past the 3rd hour, Duvek appeared at the bay door. He stood there for a moment without speaking, which was unusual for him. The blast door relay in this bay, Duvek said. I have had it noted in the maintenance log that it requires an upgrade. The new configuration will hold against cartel-grade cutting equipment for approximately 72 hours. Rael looked at him. I wanted you to be aware, Duvek said, in case the information was relevant to your planning. Thank you, Rael said. Duvek left. He did not put anything in the security report about the conversation. When Garros's 24 hours expired, he moved on Bay 9 with all 4 enforcers and a portable cutter rated for station-grade doors. He turned the corner to the Bay 9 corridor and stopped. There were people in the way. Not a handful. Workers from the dock floor, the fuel teams, the transit office, 2 Brakari maintenance crews, an Orathi shift supervisor, and somewhere in the middle of them, Asu the dockhand, holding a fresh container of cargo fish as if he had simply arrived at his usual time and was waiting for things to clear up. No weapons, no shouting, no barricade, just people standing in a corridor doing nothing except being present. Garros looked at them. He looked at the blast door behind them. He stood very still for a moment. Then he turned around and walked back to his ship. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Rael sat at the back of the Accord review chamber and let Betty's do the talking. The advocate was calm and methodical, which was what the situation needed. Preva testified for 40 minutes about Droth biology and cognitive range. The suppression coil evidence was entered into record. 3 photographs of the bolt scars under Sora's ribline were displayed on the chamber screen, and the room went very quiet when they appeared. The cartel's legal representative was good. She had the writ, the ownership documentation, 9 years of cartel records listing Sora as registered equipment. She argued precedent. She argued jurisdiction. She was thorough and she believed what she was saying. The Accord panel asked her one question at the end. If the subject was listed as equipment, Why had the cartel required suppression technology designed for use on intelligent beings? She did not have a clean answer for that. The panel deliberated for 90 minutes. When they came back, the lead adjudicator read the ruling in a flat, formal voice. The cartel's property claim was dismissed. Sara was recognized as a protected sentient individual under Outer Rim Accord law. The Vren cartel was barred from any further recovery actions. A separate investigation into cartel treatment of Droth species members would be opened within 30 days. Rael listened to all of it. He did not stand up or make a sound. He wrote down the case number in his notepad and put it in his chest pocket. Outside the chamber, Wynne grabbed his arm and made a noise that he thought might have been a word if she had slowed down enough to shape it properly. Preva stood apart and looked at the floor for a moment in the way of someone who had heard good news and needed a second to believe it was real. Betty shook Rael's hand. "Clean result," she said. "First formal recognition of Droth personhood in recorded Accord history. You understand what that means for other survivors if they are ever found." "Good," Rael said. He meant it simply. Then he went back to the station. Sara was in Bay 9. She had been there for the entire hearing, unable to attend, watched by Asu and two of the Orathi transit clerks who had apparently taken personal time off to sit with her. When Rael walked in, she looked at him immediately. He did not announce the result. He just looked at her and gave a slow, deliberate two-blink, the signal they had worked out together, which in their private shorthand meant yes. Her scales went gold. All of them, all at once, a deep and complete gold that Rael had never seen her hold for more than a few seconds at a time. She held it. He sat down on the bay floor, back against the hull of the courier ship, the same spot he always sat. He was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The kind of tired that comes from holding something up for a long time and finally being allowed to set it down. Sara crossed the bay. She moved carefully, as she always did now, deliberate with each step. She reached him and stood there for a moment, looking down at him. Then she lay down beside him. She curved her body in a slow arc, her 6 limbs folded in, and she pressed herself against him with the careful, precise pressure of something that had calculated exactly how much weight was too much. Her neck curved around him. Her head rested on the bay floor beyond his shoulder, and she was warm in the way that large living things are warm, deep, and constant. Rael sat inside the curve of her and did not move. He had not understood until that moment what she had been before Tarvas, before the cartel and the suppression rigs and 9 years of being managed with pain. He understood now, from the way she held him, the absolute and total confidence of it, as if the position was not new at all but was simply something she had always known how to do. She was not leaning on him the way a frightened thing leans on whatever is available. She was sheltering him, deliberately. The way her kind must have once sheltered the things they decided to keep. She had found him, not the other way around. Wynne came in an hour later, stopped in the doorway, and looked at them for a long moment without speaking. She took a photo on her communicator. Rael would find it later, forwarded to his work terminal without comment, and then she picked up her tools and went quietly to the other side of the bay and started working. 3 weeks after the hearing, the station administrator sent a message to Rael's terminal notifying him that Bay 9 had been reclassified as an extended workspace. The rental rate was adjusted. The listed occupants were Rael Das, mechanic, and Sara, technical associate, Droth species, resident status. The bay was exactly the same. The tools were in the same places. The ships came in broken and Rael fixed them, and Sara handed him what he needed before he reached for it. The only thing that had changed was the paperwork, and the fact that at the end of every shift, without fail, she curved herself around him in that same deliberate arc, and her scales went gold, and she did not let go until morning. The galaxy had long debated what made humans dangerous. The ones who had met Rael Das had stopped debating. The answer was not weapons or numbers or cleverness. It was simpler and harder to fight. Humans found broken things, and they did not walk away.